IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are live here on a Monday, which of course means Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Kind of recapping a little bit of the weekend. I know most people are going to want to talk about Notre Dame's obviously dominant 42-3 victory over Navy. And we can do that. You want to throw some mailbag questions in for the mailbag section of the podcast, which of course will be the last section. We can talk about Notre Dame's victory over Navy, but we are here to focus on recruiting for Notre Dame. And obviously that is going to intensify over this season, both from the 2025 perspective and maybe the 2024 perspective. We'll see obviously how things work itself out. But Notre Dame is about to have its first home game of the year against Tennessee State. So we know as Notre Dame starts to go into some of these home games, the Tennessee States, the Central Michigans, and obviously into the Ohio States of the world, you're going to be seeing visitor lists really start to fill up. So make sure you go to boards@irishbreakdown.com because on there we have a visitor list and it is going to be updated frequently. We know at least one Notre Dame commit will be on campus this weekend for the first home game of the year. Logan Saldate, California wide receiver in the class of 2024. So make sure you stay tapped in, boards@irishbreakdown.com. Today, we're going to recap a little bit of the commits in week one. And I think it's really going to lead us into a great conversation that I wanted to have about the 2024 wide receivers. I actually have a piece that I'm putting out on irishbreakdown.com. It should be out either today or tomorrow about just kind of my early takeaways from the wide receiver group in 2024. And that is Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, Micah Gilbert in the 2024 class, and how underrated I think that group is going to end up being as we kind of work through. So we'll talk a lot about the commits in the class. We'll also work on the wide receiver group in 2024, because I think that that's really where my focus wants to go for this piece. Because this morning, I put out a Notre Dame recruiting roundup of all the players from this past weekend. Last week, during the week zero, of high school football, we saw some players get their season started out, but it was a very short list. This week, we saw a lot of players that kicked off their season, including CJ Carr this past Thursday. So we're going to get into all that. We're also I have a special interview for you all. I know everyone was super excited a little over a month ago when star Bellflower, California linebacker out of St. John Bosco, Mr. Kingston Asa, committed to the University of Notre Dame. Well, one thing that I want to do for you all is, I love to give you a little bit of the parents' perspective into recruiting. So I sat down with his mother, Taliuta Asa, to talk about everything recruiting on Kingston's side, the process of narrowing it down, which I thought was really an interesting conversation, and why he ultimately ended up with Notre Dame, and also a little bit about their family and their background athletically. I just think it's a really cool conversation. We're going to get to that second. Of course, the mailbag. We already had a bunch of mailbag questions that were submitted before we even start the show here. So if you can, one-person show today, right? Rod Roberts, Director of Recruiting here at Irish Breakdown. Make sure you're putting MB in front of your chats in the message section here, okay? In the comment section, because that'll help me distinguish a lot quicker of what is a question, what isn't a question, what are people just genuinely talking about, that type of thing. So make sure you're putting in the MBs, and I'm excited to get into this show. Before I start officially, though, into the brunt of the conversation that I want to have today, I want to thank you all very much. Not only for just being live with me here on a Monday, because I truly do appreciate it so much. I really do. But also, Brian Driscoll informed me this morning of something really cool that I just want to share briefly with you all. On Saturday, Notre Dame's obviously big game day. Irish Breakdown had its biggest day in the history of the site from a traffic perspective on the website at irishbreakdown.com. So I want to send shout outs to everyone listening out there. Even if you're not a subscriber to Irish Breakdown or the message board and all that great stuff, you all are reading the content and we truly do appreciate it. So real quick shout out to you all, because I think that we try to make this a community aspect, obviously, right? But I really want to just highlight you all so much because we genuinely appreciate it. Not just the people that are on the message board. We appreciate you, of course, not just the people that tune into Irish Breakdown podcast each and every day, but everyone that just takes a second out of the day, I can truly say this just from my perspective, and I'm sure that Brian would echo this. I appreciate everyone out there that reads the articles, that listens to the podcast, even if you don't agree with some of my takes and my perspective on things. I just appreciate the attention, right? Like I appreciate you guys taking a second out of your busy days, because I'm a father of two now, a husband and obviously full-time worker. And I understand how hectic the day can get. So thank you all. Just want to start us off with that. But let's get into recruiting, obviously. So recruiting hour this week, I really want to focus on a lot of the commits from this past week that were in action. And I actually want to start this one off. Typically, I would start quarterback and then go all the way down to safety, right? You go quarterback, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, offensive linemen, so on and so forth. I actually want to start this conversation off a little bit differently because, like I said, I have an article that's coming out about the 2024 wide receiver class. And I really wanted to start us out here because I feel like that's a position that is a little bit underrated. Everyone talks about Cam Williams, and for good reason. We should. And I'm going to highlight what Cam Williams was able to do this past weekend, which was absolutely fantastic. But I think that we lose sight of how good of football players Micah Gilbert is out of the state of North Carolina and how good of an athlete and talent Logan Saldate is. Because, hey, we're still getting to know Logan Saldate, right? It was a player that was on the board for very long for Notre Dame before they were able to flip him from Oregon State. But I think that Notre Dame may have gotten a gem there and Logan Saldate. So let's roll through a couple of these games to start out this week. I really wanted to hit on, first and foremost, Cam's, who, again, everybody knows Cam because I really think, and here, I don't know if this is a hot take. I don't think it's a hot take, so please correct me if I'm wrong. If you guys agree, if you don't agree, we can have that conversation, obviously, right? But I think that there is a legitimate conversation that you could say that Cam Williams is the best recruit Notre Dame has currently in the 2024 recruiting class. I think you can make that. He would be a 5-star for me right this second. I know he's 5-star by at least one platform. And I think Rivals had him pretty high as well. So he's like a borderline 5-star by a bunch of different platforms so far. But I really think that Cam is special, man. I mean, like, just point blank to it, right? Like, this young man, and he got the week off to a great start. And I know that a lot of Notre Dame fans are regional. Like, there's a lot of people out there listening, I'm sure, that are probably near South Bend or from Chicago or a neighboring community. And luckily, Notre Dame was able to identify Cam Williams early on in this process, who is a wide receiver out of Glenbard South in Glen Ellen, Illinois, which, of course, is just a bordering outskirt of Chicago. So he's a Chicago kid. And he got this week off to a fantastic start. Glenbard South took on Aurora East High School. This game was not much of a contest, 56-21 final. But Cam Williams was a massive reason why that is. Cam Williams had let me say this again. He had 5 touchdowns in their opening season victory against Aurora East. 3 receiving, all in the first half, and 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns. I'm going to have a little piece. I got the chance to talk a little bit with Cam about the historic performance because not many guys, especially wide receivers, on the high school level have 5 touchdowns in a game ever. Like, that is just a incredible number. Like, it really is. I asked Cam, though, and I was kind of joking with him, I think on Saturday morning. I was joking with him, and I was like, dude, like, why were they kicking to you? Especially after the first one. And he told me that literally the coach on the other team on Aurora was like, dude, he was apparently freaking out at his kicker. He's like, why did you kick to him again? What are you doing? Which is just a really funny kind of situation that happened. But regardless, Cam Williams, 5 total touchdowns in the 56-21 victory. 3 receiving, 2 kickoff returns. And I joked with him a little bit because I was like, man, you're on pace for 55 touchdowns if you play 11 games again this season, right? Like, no pressure. Of course, he laughed that one off a little bit, but he is a incredibly talented football player. I think he's a 5-star today. And I think that he has been a 5-star for some time. Since Eric Santini just asked, do I know what his receptions and yards totals were? I talked to Cam, and he actually didn't know those numbers yet, and it's not posted anywhere. Like, there's not any articles out there. Max Preps doesn't have that number yet. So as soon as I have that number officially, Eric, I will put it out there. But I don't think he had a ton of catches or yards in this football. Well, yards were probably pretty good. I don't think he had a ton of catches in this football game. He just did the most with every touch he had, which was just really cool to see. So Cam Williams, star wide receiver out of Glenbard South. That's how I kind of wanted to start the conversation. But wide receiver doesn't end there, folks. Doesn't end there. Charlotte Christian, which is the home Gilberts in the 2024 class, as well as starting Bryce Young, they got their second game of the season kicked off this weekend on Friday, actually. They played against Catawba Ridge, and I completely mispronouncing that name. So my apologies for any North Carolina people, especially in here, that know better than myself. I talked about him last week, though. Micah Gilbert had a really solid opening game 2 weeks ago. He had 5 receptions for, I believe, 65 yards in the first game. This game, Micah Gilbert went bananas, folks, like absolutely bananas in this one. He had 7 receptions for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I actually did. I hope that if you're not subscribed to boards at irishbreakdown.com, you should go there now, because I started a new feature every week where I do the top 5 plays from commits over the past weekend. So 5 plays that really stood out to me, and I kind of broke it down a little bit. But I also did one that was exclusively on Micah Gilbert, because the great thing about Micah was that he wasn't just winning in one way, right? Like, there's some players that you watch and you just say, that kid's just a screen player who can just make things happen after catch. They also have players that are just vertically oriented players who they're a one-trick pony. Micah Gilbert is not that, folks. Micah Gilbert is one of those football players who can do a little bit of everything. And that's really what stands out to me. I mean, there was a deep ball where he kind of had a little bit of stutter and go happening, got some separation on the cornerback, but it was but the one thing about Micah Gilbert, and I know Brian's talked about this a ton, Micah's not incredibly fast, right? So he was able to get separation, but he ended up having to come back for the football because the opposing cornerback was able to catch up to him from behind, right? So becomes a catch point football, but Micah extends, and I think that he really showcased the best 3 attributes of his game for me. One, his body. He's got a great body, long, athletic. He's got great body control, and he's got absolute mitts for hands, man. Like, he has all 3 of those together, and I think he translates very easy to an outside receiver as a catch point guy, and he did that on this play. But the really great thing about Micah Gilbert is that's not exactly what his game is best at. He's a route runner. He's a precision player. I put him in the article that I have coming out. Like, he is a very underrated technician. He was playing as the slot receiver the majority of the game, and he's just creating instant separation with his releases, with his route running. This is a really talented football player, right? Athletically, Cam Williams is that guy. Like, he's a 4'4" athlete, incredibly athletic, strong, explosive. Micah Gilbert is not as physically gifted as what Cam Williams brings to the table. But what Cam Williams does is what Micah Gilbert does is Micah Gilbert has incredible attention to detail, and he is meticulous with his craft. I mean, his feet, there's just no wasted movement. There's no bad steps. He just understands how to play the wide receiver position. That's just kind of where you are with a player like a Micah Gilbert. So he had a tremendous day. 7 catches, 132. I saw someone say like 160 on Twitter. I saw someone say that, and I literally saw every catch that Micah had during that game, and I added up the yards myself, and I don't know how we got to 160 there. But either way, 132 yards and 7 receptions for a guy that's more of a short area dude, a guy that's going to create a lot of instant separation in Micah Gilbert. Really great number. 2 touchdowns as well, including one where it was a little bit of a scramble drill. He came back to the pylon once the quarterback broke the pocket, which just showed tremendous awareness. That's the best thing I love about Micah Gilbert's game is the attention to detail, man. Chancey Stuckey is going to love him because he's going to come in day one. It's not going to be a new language to him, right? Like there's some wide receivers that come in, you have to break it down from the absolute, just most monotonous things, right? From a stance, start, route running, top ends, sinking hips, like all that type of stuff. Micah Gilbert's not going to be one of those dudes, man. He is a really, really good athlete as an overall football player. But the things that make Micah Gilbert such a good player, because he lacks speed, is that he just understands his craft so well. So he's going to come into that Notre Dame wide receiver room in 2024, and he's going to be ahead of some guys, I think, early on, because he just knows the game, man. He knows how to play. Really, really like what Micah Gilbert has been doing the first 2 weeks, but especially week 2, man. I thought he looked very, very good this past week. And then the third receiver, which people aren't going to talk about enough because, one, those are East Coast guys or Midwest people, a little bit of a different time zone, and maybe we don't see a lot of the California action. But Logan Saldate out of Salinas, California, Palma High School, 41-12 victory over Soledad this past weekend. He had 6 receptions for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the great part about Logan, this is what I really like to see, is that the things that I loved about Logan Saldate's film as a junior immediately, where he's a really good space player, he understands how to get in and out of his breaks, he's really good after the catch, and he's just one of those dudes that I think understands how to manipulate space. And manipulate space is a really cliche kind of term, right? Think of it like this. A kid that understands how to find space, and there's a lot of ways to find space. It could be from an athleticism perspective. It could be from a route running perspective. But then the ability to manipulate space is the ability to do what you can after the catch point, right? After you get the football in your hand, what can you do to navigate? The field vision, the ability as a runner after the catch. Logan Saldate brings all that to the table, which is why I really liked him to start out this conversation, right? Really liked him when he flipped from Oregon State to Notre Dame. But I'll tell you what, guys, the one impressive thing about Logan this past weekend that I necessarily didn't see 100% on film as a junior was I didn't think he was necessarily the fastest player of all time. I didn't necessarily see that. I think the speed was solid, but I thought that his quickness was where he really won, right? Like he's a short area type of player. But there were a couple plays, including a very long touchdown in this one, where I think Logan Saldate's got a little bit more juice than he did as a junior. I really do. And he is a young man that when you look at the numbers, he's a 24-foot long jumper, 10-8 in the 100, which is a good time. It's not a great time, though. I mean, we've seen guys just over the last couple of years. I mean, you think of Micah Bell ran 10-4, Jeremiah Love ran in 10-5s. Like, that's flying, right? 10-8 is not quite to that level, obviously. But I think that his speed has taken a nice step up from where it was as a junior going into his senior year. And my article basically, 24 feet to the comment that just came in the chat. 24 feet is a ridiculous number. But I think that kind of backs up my assumption of him early on when he first committed to Notre Dame is 24-foot long jumper, 10-8, 100-meter guy. That tells me he's more of a short area dude, right? Like short area explosive. That's how I kind of thought of Logan Saldate. But I thought he showed a lot more acceleration and speed on film in his first game of the season than what I had seen as a junior. And if he does, and guys, we're talking about a really good football player. Like he just got his 4-star from Rivals. I think that Logan Saldate is a player that could really rise in the rankings this year because he's going to put up some really nice numbers. And he's a player that I think is getting now more on people's radar. When he was, all due respect to Oregon State, because you all know I love what Jonathan Smith is doing over at Oregon State. I really like the Beavers because they are really just physically imposing good program. They're coached well. But a player that's committed to Oregon State is not going to get the same spotlight as a player that's committed to University of Notre Dame. That's just kind of obvious, right? News, right? Like I'm not breaking any news there. But I think now that if he is a player that is now more on the radar, I think people are just going to notice him more, right? Like I watched his junior film. I'm like, that's a 4-star player to me. Watched his senior film, just one game of it, but that's definitely a 4-star player. Like there's no argument there. And I love potentially how this wide receiver group in 2024 is looking right now, because I look at it and say, we always talk about this, right? It's great. You need to stack talent first and foremost. You need to get talent to come in order to take the next step. And the wide receiver room under Chancey Stuckey has certainly taken that next step. I mean, we just saw what Jaden Greathouse was able to do in week 1. We saw how Jaden Thomas looked in his role. We saw Deion Coles even come and play a good football game against Navy. Wide receivers in game 1 looked really good to me. So I think that he is really transforming that room, talking about Coach Stuckey. But 2024, I'm still excited about this class because I really think that there's a world long-term, and it never happens like this because there's always defections. Someone doesn't quite become what you thought he was going to be. A guy transfers, a guy gets injured, yada, yada, yada. Like that stuff always happens. But there is a world where these 3 players could potentially be your starting lineup at Notre Dame. And again, not incredibly likely that happens because there's always things that kind of happen behind the scenes. But I look at this class and I say, for me, Micah Gilbert's the guy that I could throw in the boundary today. And he could win with his size and physicality. And then he could also come in and play in the slot at times. I look at Cam Williams and I say he could play both outside spots, but I really like him to the field. But he can play in the boundary as well. He could probably play in the slot if he wants to because Cam Williams is just a special football player, right? But I envision it like this, folks. Like, just stay with me for a second. Micah Gilbert in the boundary, Cam Williams into the field out wide as the Z, and then you put Logan Saldate in as the slot receiver, as a 5'10", 5'11", 180 pounds receiver. The reason that's such an interesting class to me, and the reason I'm so excited about it, is because they're all so different, right? Like Cam Williams is an incredibly different football player than Micah Gilbert. Both those players are incredibly different than Logan Saldate. Those players can fit together so well, which is why I think it's a tremendous wide receiver group. So there might be a wide receiver class that there are probably going to be several wide receiver classes that, from a recruiting ranking perspective, guys rank higher than Notre Dame's. But I'm just here to tell you all right now, I love this wide receiver group. And I wouldn't trade it. Is there a guy that I would take extra? Sure. Like if Ryan Wingo wanted to come to Notre Dame tomorrow, sure, right? If Micah Hudson wanted to come to Notre Dame tomorrow, cool, man. Like an elite level player wanted to come and join this group, fantastic. But I really am just enamored with this 2024 class because not only do I like each of these players individually, I think that Cam Williams is a stud, one of the best receivers in the 2024 class, 5-star player. I think Micah Gilbert's one of the very underrated players in the 2024 class of wide receiver. I mean, he's not a borderline top 250 player like he is by these platforms to me. He's a top 150 football player, potential top 100 player. That's what I think of Micah Gilbert. And Logan Saldate is a 4-star, like he is. Exactly where I would rank him. Let me watch a couple more games. Because again, I thought he looked a much different than what I saw as a junior athletically. I thought he had to step up. So if he does that across a full season, then we might be talking about a top 150 kid. It's possible. It really is. Because there's not a ton of holes in Logan Saldate's game. Because even though he's a smaller receiver, he plays really well at the catch point as well. So he might just be one of those very good all-around football players. But we'll talk about that more down the road as far as where guys are trending, what the next step, like all that, right? That's kind of that's where I want to go with this conversation in a few weeks. But as of right now, man, I'm excited about this 2024 wide receiver class. I really am. I think it is a talented group. And I wanted to kick off this commit recap because I don't think we're talking about this group enough, man. Everyone talks about Cam. And for good reason. Cam Williams is a stud. That's the 6th time I've said he's a stud already. And sorry if there's like some focus issues on the camera. I've seen a couple of people say that in the chat already. My apologies. I don't know how to fix that right now. I'm sorry, guys. I really am, man. Just maybe close your eyes and just listen to my soothing voice. I don't know if that is. I do not have autofocus on. I don't know why it's happening, man. I do not have autofocus on. But it's conversation for another day, I guess. Maybe that's a post-meeting show that I have to have. But yeah, well, sorry about the camera issues. Back, though, Cam Williams, absolute stud. Micah Gilbert, super underrated. Logan Saldate, riser in the 2024 class. That is a great wide receiver group. Love it. Now let's go to the spot that I think most people probably want us to start, and for good reason. On this on the message board as well on Friday morning, because this young man, CJ Carr, who everybody knows in the 2024 class out of Saline High School in the state of Michigan, they got their season kicked off with a 42-3 victory against the Brighton Bulldogs. And the Brighton Bulldogs apparently were 8-2 last season. So they were not a bad football team, right? But CJ Carr and his squad came in, absolutely destroyed them. 42-3, same score as Notre Dame versus Navy this past weekend, which I thought was pretty funny, kind of looking back at it. But I really thought CJ looked great in this game, man. I watched every single rep for my breakdown of him. And I talked a lot about, I think there's baseline things that CJ Carr, and he went 21 of 28 for 309 yards, 2 total touchdowns. He completed 14 of his first 16 passes on the day. Did throw 1 interception later in the second half or late in the third quarter. But for me, and the reason that I was so excited with what I saw from CJ was, one, there's a baseline thing. The baseline is that he is a really, really good player inside of structure. He can get through his progressions quickly. He's a very accurate quarterback. Ball comes out super on time. All the baseline things that you love at the quarterback position, CJ Carr has. The things that were cool to see, though, the progression that he makes, is I thought going from his sophomore year to his junior year, I thought he went from just almost a pure pocket kid to a player that can do a lot more outside of structure, is a lot more comfortable outside of structure, I should say, as a junior. Senior season, so far, it gets only 1 game, but I thought he looked even more comfortable. You know, like there's times where they're running some zone read for him where he's pulling, but was one play in particular where he broke the pockets because there's a little bit of pressure, scrambling right. And there's a dead point in this progression where he's getting close to the sideline. He kind of pulls up, and I'm like, man, it's either ball out or you're about to get killed, right? Like there's no in between there. He spins back in toward the middle of the field, and he throws a ball across field for a wide receiver that's going back to the left. And it's a very difficult throw, by the way. And I think that you saw a little bit more arm strength there than maybe you'd seen previously. And I really think that, though, that ability as an extender is incredibly underrated from CJ Carr. As a sophomore, I didn't see it from a extending perspective as much. Junior year, saw it a lot more. Senior year, first game, I saw more and more comfort out of structure. So if CJ Carr can become anywhere close to the player he is out of structure to the player he is inside of structure, then man, he's going to be a special player. Like that's just kind of where it is. Like I really think that he could be a special football player at the next level. So yeah, man, CJ Carr looked fantastic. That should be like a requisite at this point though. Like it's something that you expect, right? It's an expectation, I should say. So CJ looked great. 42-3 victory over Brighton. One running back that got me super juiced, folks. I put this again in the article. I'm going to put this article in the chat in case people are more visual learners, because I am always a visual person. I need to read things and just kind of work things out with my own mind and my own eyes. Kedron Young, running back out of Lufkin, Texas, Lufkin High School. They got their season started off, played against Tyler Legacy. Lufkin won 31-7. Kedron Young, folks, 149 yards and 3 touchdowns on only 18 carries, averaged 8.3 yards per carry. There was one play in particular that it was his first touchdown of the season. He ran for 68 yards and a touchdown on this one. And he made my top 5 plays of the week. I think he ended up being number 4 on my list, number 3 on my list. I think number 4 on my list, I believe. So a guy that is as big as Kedron is, he's 5'11", 220 pounds right around. You have a preconceived notion of what Kedron Young is going to be as a football player, right? You expect Audric Estime. You expect a guy that's incredibly physical, downhill, breaks a ton of tackles, and you get that. There's no doubt. Keidron Young could do that stuff. But Keidron's got a special gear for his size, man. He can manipulate and evaluate first and second level traffic. He can make players miss. And when he gets out into the open, my guy can scoop, man. And if you saw this game this past weekend, you saw not only Audric Estime, you saw Jabron Payne, you saw Jarian Price score his first career touchdown after the Achilles last year. You saw Jeremiah Love have 4 carries for 40 yards. Man, running back room in Notre Dame right now, it's scary, guys. Like, just talking about the 2023 season. And then you add in the fact that next year, 2024, you're going to get both Keidron Young and you're going to get Aeneas Williams. Dang, man, that's so much talent. Like, because look, I mean, honestly, like, as the NFL draft guy, right, as a guy that kind of talks to scouts and understands kind of where things are trending, I would be kind of surprised if Audric Estime was in college in 2024. I would be a little bit surprised, but every other running back should be back, right? Or could be back, I should say. I mean, even Audric Estime could come back if he felt like it. But adding to this running back room, Keidron Young, and then also Aeneas Williams, that's really good, man. I don't even, guys, it's scary. Like, it's really scary. And everyone's going to say, like, you got to find ways to get players on the field and to be able to, find roles for each player. And you got to be able to get guys touches. And you're not wrong about that, right? It's a tough thing to manage. But you just saw 5 guys get carries this past weekend. Like, we're not even including, the transfer from Penn State. And, I mentioned Jabron Payne. I mean, there's a lot of running backs in this room right now, but they all got touches, man, which was really impressive by this staff. That's one thing. I understand that Notre Dame was destroying Navy at some points, right? Like, they were dominating that football game, but they were getting Jeremiah Love, Jabron Payne, Jadarian Price touches when it still mattered. Devin Ford had touches when the game still was close. That was really impressive by the staff. So selling that to Keidron Young, to Aeneas Williams, like, hey, man, if you come in and you're a guy, you're going to get carries. Like, that's just point blank. And that kind of leads me into the next guy is Aeneas Williams had a football game. And he plays for Hannibal High School in the state of Missouri. Unfortunately, they did not have a good result on the field. They lost 49-13, but another rock-solid game for Aeneas Williams, who ran for 116 yards and a touchdown on only 19 carries. So team result wasn't great, but individual result was very good. 116 yards on the ground and a touchdown. If you guys just want to see some crazy stats and highlights, just watch what Aeneas Williams has been able to do in his career. And again, he's not playing against great competition at Hannibal, but when you don't play great competition, you have to dominate it, right? And Aeneas dominates almost every week. I mean, he is a player that can run the football, can catch the football, can return kicks if you need him to. He can block. He's just an all-around good football player. And he shouldn't be underrated in this class, because when you talk about Aeneas Williams, you talk about Keidron Young, that pair together, those guys are so different, which makes it a really, really interesting pairing moving forward, adding to this already deep running back room. Obviously, I talked about the wide receivers. I went super in depth. Oh, I almost forgot about a running back. Justin Thurman's team, don't have stats on him, but Tampa Bay Jesuit did get off to a 34-20 victory over Wharton this past weekend. They had by the way, I don't know who the young man is, but they had a wide receiver that went for like over 200 total yards in that football game and 3 touchdowns. So don't know if he's any good, but I mean, obviously he's a very good high school player, but I don't know if he's a recruit, but very interesting. But Justin Thurman's team got off to a victory as well. So running back room for Notre Dame, moving forward into the 2024, 2025, and the foreseeable future under Dylan McCullough is in a really good place. Really good place. Probably the most underrated player on the offensive side of the football in 2024 is probably Jack Larson, who is an tight end out of Charlotte Catholic in the state of North Carolina. They blanked Northern Durham this past weekend, 49-0. Jack Larson holding another touchdown reception, a 39-yard touchdown in this victory. First 2 games of the season, Jack Larson with 4 touchdowns. If you saw his first game, he had 3 total, and that one looked very good. This next game, touchdown. I mean, all the kid does is make plays at the end of the day, right? I know there's some people, naysayers out there that aren't big Jack Larson fans because of, athletically, he isn't the most stellar athlete of all time, right? Most like just killer athlete. But the kid just makes plays. And at some point, you just look at a kid and say, you know what? Just a really good football player. And that's what Jack Larson is to me. Like, he's just a really good football player. 4 touchdowns already this season. I expect him to have a big year. And he'll probably always be underrated from a rankings perspective, because he's not a guy that people are going to love from a, just a physical perspective. Just a good player, man. Just good at that point. So Jack Larson, team got off to a 2-0 start. He's a really good player out of Charlotte Catholic. 2 offensive linemen that I want to walk through before we get into the defensive side of football, which did some other really exciting things. Anthony Knapp out of Roswell, Georgia. Guys, I mean, one, they had 445 total yards and scored 71 points. They defeated Centennial 71-7. I talked about this last week. Anthony Knapp looks really good in week 1. Really, really good. He's proving me wrong as far as I thought it was a little bit of a reach when they took the commitment. But so far through 2 weeks, he looks really good. So I'm keeping an open mind. And I think that he is... Guys, can we chill in the chat, man? This is... Stop. All right. I need to stop for a second. And my apologies to Anthony Knapp, who I think has had a really good start to his senior year. But just, guys, come on, man. We're grown people. Can we not have these weird back and forths? Let's talk football. Let's talk about Notre Dame. Everyone's super excited, man. Notre Dame's 1-0. They actually played a really good football game this past weekend, and things are looking up. And we have a quarterback for the first time in years. That is substantial. So chill out in the chat, man. I don't want to block people. That's silly, right? Like, I'm not a blocker. I don't want to block people. So stop. Stop. That was my dad mode, by the way. Like, I'm talking to Juliet. Stop that. Be good. Go sit down. Anyway, sorry. Anthony Knapp, 71-7 victory over Centennial for Roswell, Georgia, having a really good senior year so far. As is Styles Prescott, whose team, Hamilton Southeastern and Fishers, Indiana, defeated North Central 35-7. So offensive linemen are off to very good starts. I think Notre Dame needed them to get off to really good starts too, because they had a lot of tools. Talking about Anthony Knapp and Styles Prescott, like, there's tools that I liked, but I needed to see a big senior year jump. And so far, they're having a jump. We'll see as far as how big of jumps they end up being in a full scope of the season, but I like what I've seen out of both these players. So that's going to do it for the offensive side of football. Let's go to defense now, okay? Bryce Young. I talked about Charlotte Christian defeating Catawba Ridge 34-13. Guys, I'm here to tell you, I don't think his stat line was quite as impressive as the first game of the year, but I think that Bryce Young was actually better in game 2 than he was in game 1. One of his plays made my top 5 plays of the week on the premium message board at irishbreakdown.com. I mean, look, 6'5", 240 plus pounds. Some people list him at 6'6" at this point. And there's preconceived notions that you get when you look at a profile, right? You look at a profile and you say 6'5", 240 something pounds. The preconceived notion, because you look at his body and you say, I look at him and I say, he's a little bit high cut. He's probably a linear player, so explosive in a straight line, probably can't change direction that well. That's my assumption, right? Then I watch Bryce Young, and I'm like, oh, my guy can move, right? Like, there's a reason that he was a former wide receiver at some point. So not only is he growing into his body and becoming a much bigger body type, he can change direction. There was this one play. I think it was the most impressive play I saw from him all game. He had this play where he completely beat the offensive lineman across his face. He was playing like left defensive end, slanted inside, beat the offensive tackle across his face, gets inside, running back tries to take him. Bryce hit almost like this jump swim move. It was kind of weird. I don't think he actually meant to do it. I think he's just super athletic, right? So he just made a move impulsively. But he got past this running back And the quarterback had moved away from Bryce, right? Like to Bryce's left, the quarterback's right, started moving. And usually when guys are high cut and can't change direction, they kind of just going in a straight line, right? And they have a tough time turning. Their hips just aren't loose and they have a tough time redirecting. Bryce Young bent his hips and he just turned on this angle that is just different for a guy his size. Like something you just can't really quite understand, right? Like uncommon is a word that I would use to say this. Straight line is explosive. He's strong. He's developing into his frame, but the looseness he plays at. There's going to be some questions of like, what position does he play long term? And I think that for me, like, I think he could be a big end or 3 tech eventually if his body keeps developing. Like, I think he could fit inside. But that ability to change direction, like, there's no reason that he can't stick outside. There's no reason. Like, he's one of those guys that, this is going to sound weird, but like, he could play defensive end at 285 pounds. Like, he could do that. I really believe that, because his change of direction for his size, the looseness of his hips, it's rare. It's a rare change of direction for a guy his size. Bryce Young is making me a believer. I'll put it like that. 2 straight games now of excellent play. I talked about this on the podcast last week. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, right, with this, because sometimes a guy has an incredible game and then you don't hear from him for a couple games. Well, Bryce Young, back-to-back weeks, 2 forced fumbles this past week, one and a half sacks. He is stacking games now. And if he has another couple games like this, guys, this might be a top 100 player. He might be a top 50 player. Like, it's very possible. He's that type of athlete and talent. It was all about maturing and getting to the best version of himself. And I think we have seen now 2 straight games that the athleticism has remained intact as the body has continued to develop and get bigger. So Bryce Young is making me a believer, man. Keep doing what you're doing, sir. You're in for a big recruiting bump. There's some platforms that already are bumping him up a little bit. But I think that this kid could be a top 100 player, top 50 possibly. Like, he's that type of dude. Incredible talent. Incredible talent. Logan Thomas and his St. Edward school, Lakewood, Ohio, St. Edward, who have won back-to-back state championships. They played on Sunday, actually, this week, because they played Good Counsel, which is a really good school out of Maryland. 28-7. And so, I mean, the defense straight games has now given up 10 points and 7 points. So 17 total points in 2 games. And they played against 2 pretty good football teams the first 2 weeks. I mean, yeah. So they played Center Grove the first week and then Good Counsel back-to-back weeks. Just defensively, Logan Thomas has been everything that they expected him to be. Another guy that especially if you watch his week 1 performance, just filling out. He's getting longer. He's getting more explosive. If he keeps developing, then he is potentially a top 100 player as well. Like, he has that type of upside to him. It was always about just growing into your frame more, being a little bit more technically sound. Those things that you're starting to see out of a Logan Thomas, which is super, super exciting. And we're going to have to start having a conversation. If this development continues to happen, and if Logan Thomas and Bryce Young continue their ascension, then this defensive line class has a chance to be special for Notre Dame in 2024. Because it's not even counting Cole Mullins, who we're expecting to take a nice senior year jump, because Cole Mullins has been banged up, obviously, the first 2 weeks of the season. He's banged up currently. His team won again, Mill Creek, but he's going to be out for 3 months, and he already had surgery, obviously, on the lower leg injury. So he is hoping to take a step forward, obviously, when he gets back. But adding those into the 2 freak show athletes that we have in Bryce Young and Logan Thomas in 2024 class, defensive end group has a chance to be really good. We also saw 2 defensive tackles that were in action this weekend. One was Sean Sevillano Jr., who's out of Clearwater, Florida Academy International, who lost this football game, lost 28-21 against Columbus, Miami school. But, guys, Sean Sevillano was pretty dang disruptive this week. Pretty dang disruptive. His official numbers were, if I remember correctly, and I believe, so 11 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. Everyone knows, we've talked about this on the show, I still have my reservations about Sean Sevillano at the next level as far as an upside play. But the one thing you can't discount is that he's playing better competition this year than what he did last year, and he's still putting up crazy numbers, man. Crazy numbers. I mean, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 11 total tackles as a defensive tackle. It's crazy numbers. Those are really crazy numbers. So that is, I mean, Sean Sevillano is just putting up numbers his first 2 weeks for Clearwater Academy International. So they lost a nail biter. I know he was a little frustrated with it, but really just a really good season that he's putting together from a reduction perspective. Last defensive tackle I wanted to hit on before getting into linebackers and some defensive backs. Davion Dixon out of Miami Palmetto. He was a transfer to Palmetto this offseason. They beat Homestead 13-12. If you guys want to just go back and watch a little bit of his game, his stats aren't crazy in this one, but the second half, coming out of halftime, Davion Dixon was unblockable. I mean, like, he really was, man. He was giving guys fits, absolute fits. So, talented kid in the 2025 class, Davion Dixon, a young man that has been on high on Notre Dame for a very long time, obviously committed to Notre Dame this past blue and gold game. Both defensive tackles are off to a good start this season. Man, I feel like I need to be hooked up to an IB, IV, excuse me. I said IB. That's so funny. Anyway, linebackers. Let's get into linebackers, guys. Linebackers that were on. So this one was a fun one because this one was actually on ESPN this past weekend on Saturday, if anybody got a chance to see this one. Flower, California linebacker out of St. John Bosco, Kingston Viliamo Asa, traveled with his team, who is a defending state and national champion. They traveled down to Florida to St. Thomas Aquinas. Defeated them 20-7 today. The funniest tweet ever was there was a St. Thomas Aquinas fan in the crowd that said 2,286 miles to take an L on ESPN, obviously throwing shade at St. John Bosco during the game. And St. John Bosco, their Twitter page retweeting, just said, nope. I thought it was fantastic, man. It was so funny. And yeah, I mean, Kingston, first 2 games of the season, you saw especially in the first game because he dropped the huddle highlight on it. But he is just such a good football player. I mean, at the end of the day, what makes Kingston Viliamo Asa special to me is that, yes, he's 6'3", 230 pounds, but he is physical. You could see that. But, man, his instincts are just fantastic. He sees the game at such a fast rate. I mean, his eyes are tremendous, and he looks a little more explosive this year than he was as a junior. And if that's true, then he's a top 50 football player in this class, like easily, in my opinion. Like, if he is a 6'3", 230-pound guy that plays as proactively as he does, and he has the explosiveness that he puts on film this first couple games, that kid's a top 50 player in this class. Like, it's no doubter, right? So getting a player like that out of St. John Bosco, because we've talked about it, right? Why does Jaden Greathouse look so good as a freshman, guys? Because he played at one of the best schools in the country at Austin Westlake. He came in, and what to him is playing on national television. Like, he's done that in his career. He's won multiple state championships. He was on one of the best teams, the best Texas 6A team in the entire state for multiple years. So Jaden Greathouse came to campus and was like, dude, I'm just balling, man. Like, I'm just doing my thing, right? And that's the same thing that I think that Kingston's going to do. And I'm not saying that Kingston's going to be a breakout star as a freshman, although if he did, I wouldn't be shocked about it because I think he's a really, really good football player. But he's going to be one of those guys that, like, he's going to come to Notre Dame and practices and just film work and all that stuff. It's going to be second nature. That's what he does. That's what Kingston does. Like, he knows the game inside and out, why I'm excited that you guys are going to get to hear my conversation with his mother after this section, which I thought it was a fantastic conversation. So looking forward to that one. Kingston Viliamo Asa, crazy football player, man. They went down to St. Thomas Aquinas and won 20-7. It's what they do. Travel. They play the best teams in the country. Football games. It's what St. John Bosco does. And Kingston's a reason for that, obviously. Another linebacker that I'm looking really forward to seeing in the 2024 class, and I'm waiting for the film to drop from the first week. But Bodie Calhoun out of Roanoke, Virginia, Patrick Henry High School was the lacrosse player that was formerly committed to Ohio State. Really good lacrosse player. They opened up their season with a 58-25 victory over Brookville. If you remember the backstory on Bodie, Bodie was a safety throughout the entirety of his career, and then he moved there for 5 games as a junior, and now he's being evaluated, obviously, to project as an inside linebacker on next level, Will to Mike type of football player. Well, Bodie is also playing a little bit of fullback and tight end for his school this year. So I'm excited to see the film drop, but obviously Patrick Henry High School got off to a great start this season with the 58-25 victory this past week. So I talked a little bit with Bodie about it. He said he felt really good, a lot more comfortable playing the linebacker position. So Bodie, if you're listening out there, man, you're a good friend of the show. You've gone on here before. Drop that huddle tape, sir. I need to see some of the film from the first week because obviously the team got off to a great start, but I want to see what type of player that he's developing into because talent is all there. I mean, he's listed between 6'2", 6'3", 220 pounds, and he has a verified 4.54 on his record. So this kid is a good size, good looking athlete that can run. So if he's able to put it all together and get more comfortable at the linebacker position, I think he could end up being a steal in this class. A guy that's only ranked as a 3-star right now, but I think he could be a 4-star if he has a big season. So Bodie and his school, though, got off to a really nice victory, 58-25 over Brookville this past weekend. Last linebacker, and once I'm going to buzz through this one. There just wasn't a lot of stats in this one because, unfortunately for Teddy Rizak, who's a linebacker out of Omaha, Nebraska, West Side, is that his numbers on the day weren't impressive. He only had 3 tackles and he had 1 catch on offense. But the reason that they weren't impressive is because his team won 57-7 and he didn't even play in the second half. So, unfortunate for him, he wasn't able to play a ton of football this past weekend, or this past Friday, I should say. But his team now won back-to-back state championships in the state of Nebraska, got off to another solid start. So 57-7 victory over Creighton. I am personally excited to see what Teddy Rizak puts on film for the rest of the season, but obviously very dominant fashion this past weekend for his school. I wanted to get into the defensive backs before we wrap up here. Carson Hobbs, Cincinnati, Ohio, Archbishop Moeller High School. They defeated Bishop Dwanger, who is an Indiana school, 57-0. Of course, I was following the 49-28 loss last weekend to Ben Davis. They came back and put it on Bishop Dwanger. I had talked to Carson before that game, and he was being very nice about it. I guess I'm like, oh, how's Bishop Dwanger look this season, man? How are you feeling about that game? But he kind of said like, oh yeah, they're okay. They're okay. And what he meant to say was they're not very great, and they took him to the woodshed in this football game. So 57-0. Carson was targeted twice in this football game, did not give up a catch. Another situation where, and this is true of both, true of Teddy Rizak. This is going to be true of Kennedy Urlacher when we get there. But their teams just won in dominating fashion this past weekend. So they just didn't play a ton to the second half. But great victory for Archbishop Moeller. A great step, obviously, after the tough loss week 1 against Ben Davis. Carson Hobbs obviously took a nice step forward. The other corner in the 2024 class, Leonard Moore, cornerback out of Round Rock High School. Round Rock that the Brady James and his family are from originally. And Leonard Moore is a guy that I know that Irish Breakdown has been very high on him for some time now. And someone just said, fix Mike. Mike is crackling. Okay, give me 1 second, folks. I will try to remedy in just a second. All right, I'm back. Let me know if it sounds any better now. Hopefully, if you guys could just give me a yep, sounds good, sounds better, something in the chat, I would very much appreciate that to let me know that no cracking is happening. That's the one tough part about doing a solo show is, obviously I can't control that. So if it sounds better, cool. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, USMA87. Thank you all so much. And sorry about that technical issue there. So I was talking about Leonard Moore, who unfortunately his team got off to a little bit of a tough spot this past weekend. They lost to Weiss 37-7. But I am really excited about Leonard Moore in this 2024 class. If you guys have been listening just to Irish Breakdown in the past, Irish buddy, you need to chill out in the chat, man. I'm about to block you, sir. Chill out. But Leonard Moore, 6'2", 175 pounds, a really talented longer corner in the 2024 class that Notre Dame is very excited about. Irish Breakdown is very excited about. I'm excited to see the step he takes as a senior because I think there's more speed there than maybe has been on film in junior season. I think he really takes a nice step forward as a senior. So excited about that and the growth of Leonard Moore. Let's talk about the safeties in the class. Not going to hit on Bronte Johnson. Bronte Johnson's team lost 35-30 this past weekend. Fortunately, Bronte is still out with the lower leg injury, expected back in week 3. So we'll get to see some Bronte Johnson very shortly. But unfortunately, this game was not one of them to see Bronte. Two safeties, though, that were in action this past weekend. What was Kennedy Urlacher? And I kind of already hinted at this one. He's out of Chandler High School in the state of Arizona. They defeated Cesar Chavez 56-6. I talked to Kennedy, and he just said it was a boring game for him. So he didn't get a ton of action. He didn't play in the second half. So unfortunately, not a lot of stats to be thrown around for Kennedy Urlacher because they had a dominating victory in the first game against Cesar Chavez. But no problems with winning 56-6 once on a blue moon. So, So that is Kennedy Urlacher. The last guy I wanted to talk on briefly was Tabron Benny Powell out of Westchester, Ohio, Lakota West. Lakota West, of course, the same high school as Ben Minnick in the 2023 class for Notre Dame, safety. And Malik Hartford, who is now at the University, the Ohio State University. Unfortunately, Lakota West lost 18-3. I just want to highlight here, though, because I saw a lot of clips and a lot of stuff about Tabron Benny Powell the first 2 weeks. I'll say it like this. I think that Lakota West is not as good as they were last year, unfortunately. They lost a lot of talents, not only just the two guys I talked about, but they lost a lot of offensive talent. I mean, they've only scored 0 and 3 points the first 2 weeks. So the offense is not playing well. But the defense is, guys. Defense only gave up 10 points at St. Xavier week 1, and they only gave up 18 points this past weekend. So the defense has come ready to play. I just think Tabron looks pretty good so far, man. I think he looks like a better athlete than what I thought he was on film as a junior. I hope he's able to take a next step forward because he is a young man that 6'1", 180 pounds, can certainly hit, certainly physical, certainly aggressive. I like a lot of his work in the run game. I just need to see the athlete be more consistent as a higher level. And we saw it first week that he looked really good, blocked the field goal. This past week had a couple pass breakups and was still active in the run game. So Tabron Benny Powell, I think, took a really nice step forward so far this season. I need to see more. I need to see from a game-to-game perspective. But Tabron Benny Powell, nice step forward so far for Lakota West, playing his more natural safety position compared to a rover outside linebacker spot that he was playing as a junior. So that's the kind of the recap of this past weekend of the Notre Dame commits in action. Don't go anywhere because I still got 2 more segments for y'all, man. So don't go anywhere. Keep putting those mailbags in the chat. Next, we're going to go to an interview that I did, that I recorded previously. This was with Taluta Viliamo Asa, who is the mother of star 2024 Notre Dame commit Kingston Viliamo Asa. I had a great conversation with Taluta, who is what a great woman. And I think you'll hear some of her insights, which I think was fantastic. But she gave me a lot of information here. What went into Kingston's decision, their decision-making process, their family's perspective in general, and a lot of the background of him as an athlete, which I think was really, really cool. So I hope you all enjoy it. We're going to get to that next. Before we do, if you could just hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, notification bell at the bottom of the screen. We'll be having IB Nation Sports Talk every day. I'll be back with Brian Driscoll tomorrow to start some prepping for Tennessee State. So make sure you subscribe to this podcast on any and all of your favorite podcast platforms. 5-star reviews are also very much appreciated if you're listening to us on whatever favorite podcast platform you have, whether it's Apple, Spotify, and anything in between. So next, Taliuta Viliamo Asa, my conversation with her. I hope you all enjoy. Let me know that you can hear it on the other side, and please enjoy this recent interview on Irish Breakdown Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We have a little bit of an insight, another interview for you all. Everybody was incredibly pumped a few weeks ago now, when star 2024 Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco linebacker Kingston Viliamo Asa committed to the University of Notre Dame. Of course, chose them over finalists Ohio State and USC. Was a massive victory on the recruiting side of things for Notre Dame. I've gotten a little bit of Kingston's insight into the past. He's been on this podcast before. We've done multiple interviews on him, multiple pieces. Obviously, we know how big of a deal this was for Notre Dame, but I wanted to bring a different perspective to the show for you all today. So I have his mother joining the podcast today, Taliuta Viliamo Asa, joining the show today. Taliuta, I really appreciate you first and foremost for joining the show today. I'm really excited to kind of get the parents' perspective on the recruiting process and everything that was involved with Kingston. Thank you for joining the show. Really do appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to boast about your son for a second, if I can. Okay, I want to start us off here because I spoke to his head coach Jason Negro at St. John Bosco after he had committed to Notre Dame and just did a nice little coach follow-up piece on him. And one thing he told me, which I think is a great way to start, is that Kingston's a unicorn, just a kid that doesn't come around too often. And I know you know this already, so I'm not saying anything that's like super new, breaking news to you, but we're talking about a young man that, of course, is a great athlete. I mean, we don't need to talk about that too much, right? Like, we watched the film. We know Kingston's fantastic. He's also a great student, over a 4.0 GPA and really smart young man. And he also is grounded in his faith, which I think is just very unique. You don't often come around these types of kids, because I was a teacher for a while. So like, I've been around a lot of kids in my life, coaching and teaching. But Kingston is one of those rare people that really just hits every aspect of it, right? From a athlete, from a student, from a young man, and the values he has. My first question for you is, how proud are you of that young man? I mean, he's a tremendous young man.
I'm extremely proud of Kingston. It was a long time coming, but he's a great kid. He very obedient, and just basically followed the pathway we had for him. So, yes.
Well, and let me ask you about that pathway, because I know that when you have family, that is a big part of the support system, obviously, and helping the guy, because the recruiting process can get super stressful for kids. It really can. A lot of coaches calling, texting, come on this visit, come on that visit, and then obviously making a big decision in the end. So what was, in your perspective as a mother, what was your guidance like for Kingston? Like, what did you want to make sure that you provided to him to make sure that he made the best decision for him, and that he knew that he had the support behind him all the way?
I wanted to look at the whole picture. I just didn't want to take pieces of the picture. So what was the academic like? What was the atmosphere like? What was the football program like? What was the social like? What are the aspects of spirituality within the university? So I didn't take pieces of it. It had to be a whole piece, and the picture had to come together. So all four corners meet in the middle, and came up with the full plan. So those were the connecting dots to the journey.
Yeah. Well, it makes total sense, because every time I talked about Kingston, I mean, he kind of laid out all the things he was looking for, right? I mean, he talked about player development. He obviously talked about the degree and the academic side, playing great level of football, feeling like he was a part of the community and the culture. And it all makes a ton of sense, obviously, how it ended up the way it did with the University of Notre Dame. Let me ask you, Calhoun, just as far as your perspective on Notre Dame for a second, before we get into like relationships and everything. I know that a big part of his official visit was you getting out to see the campus and to see everything and to meet the coaches in person and do all that type of stuff. But early on, what was your perspective of Notre Dame, and how much, I guess, getting on that visit, did that really solidify that that was potentially a really good place for Kingston?
So I actually was the person taking Kingston on visits. So I actually been to Notre Dame about 3 times before the official visit. I think every time Kingston went, I was with him. So I was the basically his tour guide person. So I went almost on every visit with him, aside from the ones that he took with coaches. But the majority of the time it was us. But Notre Dame was when we first stepped on foot. I believe it was 2021, I think, when Kingston was injured that sophomore year. We took several trips throughout that time, and it was different. The atmosphere was different. The people were different. The students were different. It just was a different place, and we had to revisit it a few more times in order to solidify that Notre Dame would be the place for Kingston. So the spiritual aspect of Notre Dame was key for us because we wanted that to continue. The academic piece, I knew it wouldn't matter where Kingston went, but I also did want a university that I felt was suitable for him, that he would grow academically and still continue on like he has been doing all his years. So those were important pieces to me for Kingston.
Well, and I'm really curious because I'm a parent of 2 young daughters, so obviously I haven't figured out the college process, obviously, in the future and all that great stuff. But let me ask you, as a mother for a young man, that one school that he was looking at obviously at a high level was USC, which is right in your guys' backyard, pretty close to home. And then he's looking at both Notre Dame and Ohio State, which are obviously way out in the Midwest and way far away from home. I guess my question for you is like your perspective of him going far away from home. Was it something that makes you nervous? Was it something that you're completely open to as far as making the travels? Like, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, because like I only have a 2.5-year-old and a 3-month-old right now, and I'm just like, don't ever leave home, don't ever leave your daddy type of thing. I guess what was your kind of just your thoughts on him looking at places that were so far away from home, and then I guess expanding and being able to, I don't know, take flight, whatever kind of phrase you want to coin there.
Okay. So for us, our approach through the process it did not matter where our son went. We didn't care how many miles we had to go. The best fit for Kingston was what was important for us. And to us, the miles didn't matter. I didn't care what school broke it down or gave us the mileage from California to Indianapolis, or California to Ohio State, or Cerritos to USC. The whole process had to be researched from, just the whole picture, like I said before, but the miles didn't matter for us. And honestly, Kingston, we're ready for Kingston to go on ahead and take flight, simply because his maturity level, his confidence, we've trusted that we've been able to instill in him the values and the morals necessary to be able to trust that he would go across the country and be able to still succeed without us. And in addition to that, his future is right there. So he's got to make it. You know what I'm saying? So he won't be with mom and dad forever. Mm-hmm. And at some point we have to let him go. And we were comfortable with that decision that wherever he wanted to go, he could go.
I'm really curious because I've known Kingston's name for a long time. I remember when he was dominating as a freshman for St. John Bosco, and everybody's talking about like he's the next big thing, right? Like he's the next guy. I would love to hear about maybe a little bit of your family background athletically, like as far as how athletic the family is, and was there a moment, I guess, maybe growing up where you were like, oh wow, Kingston's pretty good, like he's probably going to be a really good football player at some point here?
Well, I think for us, Kingston was one of those kids that no matter the sport you put him in, he would master it.
Yeah.
So for him at 4, no, at 2, we started him off with basketball, and then it just year after year we went year round with football, basketball, baseball, football, basketball, baseball. Then as he grew older, it went football, basketball, rugby, football, basketball. We tried a few things with him until we actually found his niche. And at, I want to say 7 years old, when my husband said he's ready for tackle. He's ready for tackle football because he played 4, 5, and 6 in flag. And actually, the only reason why I got Facebook or even got on social media was to expose Kingston.
Nice.
His talent, because I felt that he was very talented at that age. The IQ for him was very sharp. His interest in the game, as far as watching, he wouldn't watch the game at that young age. He would watch the positions. So there were key positions that he would focus on. And so basically, we knew that whatever he put his mind to, that he would for sure succeed at mastering the sport.
So it makes total sense that kind of early on you had a big indicator that it would be type of player, and then he ends up at St. John Bosco. And I kind of wanted to ask about them a little bit for a second, because when I spoke to Coach Negro, I kind of asked him about this as far as St. John Bosco puts out great football players every single year. I mean, Kingston obviously is one of them, but like I even look at the rest of the 2024 with like Peyton Woodyard and Jason Mitchell and all these great players. How much of a help were they in this process, knowing that so many kids have come through St. John Bosco? Obviously, Coach Negro understands the recruiting process very well, how to help kids out. How much was their support beneficial to you guys?
So I have to be honest, growing up, St. John Bosco wasn't even in the conversation for high school for Kingston.
Oh, wow.
We kind of navigated his way, and we were living in a city called Eastvale. Okay. And Eastvale, he played some junior All-American with Eastvale, but then we felt that his talents exceeded the team. So we moved him to a more competitive team that had a lot of studs or a lot of talented athletes that were at his level.
Sure.
And so instead of just 3 in the neighborhood team, we went to a team that probably 20 were on that team, had the same similar abilities as Kingston. And then from there, it just led to travel ball. But Corona Centennial was where we were going to send Kingston. But a lot of what I saw going into Centennial at the time and the traffic that I saw that was going in there, I didn't want to deny Kingston the opportunity. So I went to the Trinity schools. I went to the local schools. I want to say we did about 7 different shadow days.
Okay.
The Trinity schools, we went to Mater Dei, Bosco, and also J. Sarah. And actually at the beginning, J. Sarah was the lead at the beginning before this all started. And then, the thing going into Bosco, Coach Terry Bullock was very instrumental, and so was Coach Rob Fuyava. They were very instrumental in just getting us to come and see what Bosco was about. And for, after going to all those schools and going to Bosco, I had to come visit Bosco again.
Sure.
But the thing that really captured my attention with Bosco was Negro and us sat in the office for like almost 2 hours.
Wow.
And most of the conversation was not about football. It was everything outside of football.
Yeah.
And that was key for me, was that he wanted to know about the family. He wanted to know about Kingston. He wanted to know the dynamics of everything around to make this kid the football player, right? But it never really struck a conversation more of football than it did about everything outside of football. Awesome. And then going to the robotics engineering class, I remember us going to they took us to, there was an assembly going on, so they took us to the assembly. We got to listen to a little bit of it. Then we also went to a robotics engineering class, and we learned some things in there. But what struck me was Kingston was so inquisitive. He was so he was asking the teacher a lot of questions. Wow. And you're walking in there with a 14-year-old and you're like, for reals, he's asking. But the questions he was asking were really good questions. And so for me as a parent, the academic side, very important, very key. Absolutely. It's always been key. As a matter of fact, if he wasn't a talented football player, I wouldn't care. But because I saw his passion for the game at a young age, we decided to venture off into that interest he had in football. And it was our responsibility as parents to be able to get him to where he needed to get to in order to get that scholarship to college. Yeah. And so the coaches at Bosco were very instrumental. And the good thing is his position coaches have been there all along. If a coach would reach out, they would let me know. Coach Terry, Coach Fuiava, they were very instrumental. They were the piece to let me know about a whole lot of the colleges and what was going on. And I think a lot of them probably did warn the colleges or the coaches that were inquiring about Kingston that, okay, you're going to deal with the mom who doesn't play and she's serious about her son. So I believe Negro at the beginning, when he was a freshman, just the things that he would say to the media, just the platform that Bosco has, just the family atmosphere from all the coaches, those were all key factors in this kid's success at Bosco leading into the commitment to Notre Dame.
So as far as the commitment that finally happened, it was a fascinating recruitment because Kingston, and it makes sense just hearing the supports that he had behind him with yourself and the other coaches, he had a really thorough, I think, process as far as he made a smaller group. He evaluated everything. Eventually, he comes to the top 3 of USC, Ohio State, Notre Dame. He's like, I want to take official visits to them, and then I want to have a couple weeks of clarity and come to a decision, right? My question is, after those official visits, seeing everyone for the last time, getting the last kind of impressions of the coaches, being able to talk yourself and him just kind of firsthand and his family, what was the last, I guess, couple weeks there as far as when Kingston had all the data, you guys had all the data, all the impressions, all the understanding, and now it was really time to kind of sit down and figure out the best spot for him. As a mother, your perspective, how did you help him guide through those last couple weeks? How, I guess, I proud, I guess, is a good word as far as like how he was able to handle this down the stretch there. I'm just kind of wondering about the insight of like what those last couple weeks were like.
So I can honestly say the whole process has been not stressful for us as a family. A lot of the things Kingston was able to handle on his own, from interviews to the communication with the coaches. I had only what he couldn't handle. And I had only the communication that was necessary for the parent. But the last few weeks, the whole journey is purposeful and intentional. So we were very intentional about the process. The last few weeks of the process, after we had taken those official visits, it was important throughout the process that we continue to meet with him and continue to come out with a plan of how we were going to do the last few weeks leading up to the commitment. And so we just wanted Kingston to just relax. We wanted him to soak it all in because we had decided that we as his parents navigated his way, right? In youth football to get him to the high school we needed to get him to, and now to college. And we felt we did a great job navigating his way there. And then his decision was going to be the college choice. And we knew that the last few weeks, I think maybe the last few weeks were probably the most stressful that we saw Kingston. Not stressful to where he was just freaking out, but just stressful. We could see some things in the dynamics of the day that he was probably going back and forth with on between the different three schools. I can honestly say it could have been any of them. But his ultimate decision, even when we planned the commitment date, was purposely done after a week that he was able to go and just disconnect from the whole world, with no cell phone, nobody communicating with him, nobody contacting him, so that he could go to the mountain and just sit and talk to the Lord and get the guidance and the direction. Because I can tell you, going into that, it was going to be either USC or Ohio State.
Yeah.
And coming out of it, it ended up being Notre Dame.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's incredible, the journeys, like it's just, because I obviously had heard that story as soon as after Kingston had interviewed and made his commitments about, as far as, I think he said something like Notre Dame was the one place that I couldn't see myself. Right. But then after that week of clarity, it kind of all came into focus for him. Like, it's just incredible story. I have two questions for you. I'm so sorry for going a little bit over on my time here, but this is a fantastic interview. So I'm curious, as far as from the Notre Dame side of things, you talked about relationships a lot already, obviously, with your relationship with the coaches and getting to know everyone. And even from the St. John Bosco side to really, be able to sit down with Coach Negro for 2 hours and to just talk about everything. Right. So I'm curious about Notre Dame and how you feel like those relationships have been building with yourself and with Kingston. So I know Al Washington was at Ohio State previously, and he obviously had a relationship with Kingston even before he was at Notre Dame. I know Marcus Freeman was pretty instrumental in this decision, and obviously the relationship that they built. Can you just give me a little bit of insight into the Notre Dame relationships that Kingston and your family have been able to build?
Well, the problem is, Ryan, it doesn't matter where I go, we build the relationships. So
right.
it wasn't easy.
Sure.
But at the end of it all, you still want them to respect you and you respect them.
Yep.
But with Notre Dame, the genuity, I'd say, of the coaches, Al Washington was very instrumental in this whole process. So I think what captured the essence of getting down to the final three, because Kingston actually wanted a top 10. And I told him, you are not going to entertain everybody. You're going to only pick a top 3, and that's what we're working with. Gotcha. And so the Notre Dame was very, very consistent, even during the times of his injury. They were one of the consistent ones. And Ohio State was as well. Coach Lincoln Riley, of course, he came on and it developed, right? But Notre Dame never wavered with us. Notre Dame, even with Coach, the defensive coordinator, even with Al, he was he was when he came upon, he was more reserved, I'd say. But Washington knew that he could reach out. We could talk. It wouldn't matter. Coach Freeman knew he could call. It wouldn't matter. Coach Bulla came up on the scene, and we just felt like we connected right away.
Nice.
Chad has always, forever, and always been our go-to guy when there was a question. Caleb, just the whole staff. I mean, there's not a one thing I can say that they were great. They were great. And I have to trust as a mother that I'm sending my kid across the country, and to be able to trust the people that I'm leaving my son to. And I felt that with Notre Dame. And so that's my little
I love it. No, I love it. It's so great to hear, because I know that I had heard, obviously, just talking to Kingston, and both obviously sources of how just instrumental every coach was, right? Like, it wasn't just it wasn't a primary and secondary recruiter in this situation. Like, it was a whole collaborative effort to really sell the vision. So that actually just reassures everything that I heard, that is 100%. My last question, and this is more of a fun one, I think, is that Kingston just got his season kicked off last Friday. They defeated Liberty 42-22. I watched his huddle highlight. He was fantastic in that football game. How cool is it now that the recruiting stuff is kind of behind you as a family, to be able to watch football again, to be able to watch your son excel, and to be a senior finally?
You know what? Football is my favorite time of year. Football season is my favorite time of year. I go all out for football season, but I'm so glad. And if you see how Kingston decided the commitment date was right before they get ready to full-on practice, right?
Yep.
So that way he could commit and not have to worry about this, because he's so focused on his final classes that he has left and his football season, because we're going to run it back. Oh, yeah. We're going to run it back to get that national championship. That's and, right. His focus right now is those two things. He doesn't want to do a whole lot of interviews. I'm sorry, this computer, they've had shortage outages, but good. He doesn't want to focus on interviews. I mean, if they're there on the field, he'll do the interview. But as far as taking the time out, Kingston is extremely busy from the time he wakes up till the time he gets home, and is up doing his homework. And so by then it's time to eat, shower, and go to sleep, So I love it. I'm probably the loudest cheering mom at Bosco, and I get the crowd wild up, but I enjoy it. The kids love to hear their parents, right? I mean, Kingston is very humble. I can tell you this. Kingston does not like his parents to talk about him. So we leave that for everybody else. So it's humbling to have a kid like him, who doesn't want the attention on him, but wants it on everybody else. But Kingston is so deserving of everything that he's getting right now.
Well, that's why there's people like me, so I could boast about your son, about how fantastic he is. That's it. And I should have mentioned that. I didn't even mention that during this podcast, but yes, defending state and national champion, St. John Bosco, 13-1 last year. I watched their rematch against Modern Day in the playoffs, and that was one of the best games I had watched all season. That was a fantastic game. So, yes, I'm happy, though, just genuinely, that he's able to now experience everything and just be able to kind of stay laser focused. Because I don't know if I definitely didn't tell you, but I was talking to Coach Negro, and I actually met Kingston down in San Antonio last year at the All-American Bowl, and he is super laser focused, because he gave me a handshake, and he almost broke my hand. I'm like, that kid is a strong kid, man. Absolutely nuts. So, yeah. So as I get to know your family, obviously I'm getting your perspective as the mother. I would love to hear about just the impact, though, that Kingston's father had in this as well, as far as what has he been able to guide. I know that he has obviously been very instrumental in him developing into the great football player he is, but just kind of insight into his role in helping Kingston get to where he is now.
Yes. So Kingston's, when Kingston was 4, and because he was the tallest kid, they would always put him on the line. And so at first, we were just observers. My husband and I were just observers. And then my husband was like, no, he's not going to be on the line. I mean, just by what he saw in Kingston. And so he coached Kingston. He ended up coaching from 4 to 13. And it was done that way purposely because at 14U, we wanted it to be other coaches because he would be going into high school after that. And his dad wouldn't be on the sideline. So we decided to do that. But my husband was very instrumental in that he did watch film with Kingston. He did go over plays with Kingston. In coaching him, my husband used different techniques for Kingston to be able to understand the game, and things that were relative to him as a child. So cartoon characters were very important. My husband would use the cartoon characters from Transformers.
Oh, wow.
So he would call out a play and he would say, Bumblebee. And it was a specific tackle based on the movie, right? So Bumblebee would do a certain move in the movie, and that's the same technique he would apply it to. And then he would say 2-1 Adam. He would say 2-1 Adam, or he'd say laser focus. Or, he would always use cartoon characters to be able to yell it out for Kingston to execute it on the field.
Wow.
And so my husband trained Kingston in our front yard from ever since he was little. And he used what we had. So, those fairly large trash cans. Kingston tackles the way he tackles today because that's what my husband taught him how to tackle, was the large trash cans. Awesome. He used foam and a large trash can. And he would have Kingston jump over the foam and tackle the trash can. And he also used a broomstick. So he would line out our yard into a square shape because we had 2 yards in the front. So the 1 yard, our left side, you could put into a square shape. And he would make Kingston run in the square. But if the broomstick landed on his back, he was too slow. So he would go around the square and chase Kingston in the square with the broomstick. And that's how he was able to catch his speed before we started putting him in training. And so, Kingston was a running back and a linebacker growing up. And then safety, he ended up, as he grew older, they ended up putting him at safety and also corner. So he did DB. He did all those positions on the defense. So pretty much he knows, right? So when Kingston would be running back, and if he was going to catch a pass and he missed the pass, when we got home, my husband would have Kingston put his hands flat out and he would hit him with anything, a stick, a paddle. He would hit him for how many times he missed the ball. So there were several nights of film work. So after every game, we'd get a DVD of the game, and then we'd go over it, and then, he would go over the film with him. Well, what could you have done differently here, son? What could you have changed here to be able to make this play? But, that dedication, that commitment, I'm over there helping out with the team. My husband's over there coaching the team. And then we have a player on the team. So that the commitment, the dedication, the sacrifices that we had to make all built this and developed this player that we had. So I think, in his youth football, everybody was laughing at us when we would be yelling these cartoon characters out, but when we would yell it, Kingston would execute it.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, they would laugh, right? They would laugh in the stands. They were like, "What? What are you talking, Bumblebee?" They had no idea what we were doing. But it was my husband's message to Kingston how to execute the play. You know, the scheme of it. You know, and he had several different, like being laser focused, how to just go straight out and just tackle the guy or quarterback or any, you know, how to be like the eagle. The eagle scans the field and then makes his attack. So, I mean, there were a lot of things that my husband used in order to be able for Kingston to understand at that young level. And then, of course, as he grew older, those names had to change because now you were running routes and now you are playing cover two, you know, different things like that. But I thought that it was very instrumental that starting from that led to this and led to what he is today.
You have a great kid. You've made a great young man. Talia, I really appreciate you again for taking so much time. I told you 10 or 15 minutes, and we're about to hit 30 minutes on this podcast, but this was a fantastic interview. I really appreciate so much hearing your perspective on the whole process, because I think that this is the part that we don't get enough, right? Is that, you know, we talk about what these kids do on Friday nights all the time, what they're going to do on Saturdays, but we don't get like the human aspect enough as far as who these people are, you know, and the recruits that we're talking about each week. So thank you so much for joining the Irish Breakdown podcast. It was genuinely a pleasure. I really just want to let you know that I really appreciate you taking some time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, there you are. That is Taliuta Viliamo-Asa, the mother of 2024 Notre Dame linebacker commit, Kingston Viliamo-Asa. If you guys could take a second and just let me know if you hear me loud and clearly. Again, I just want to make sure that the mic has no issues as we transition into our next topic. So if you just put sounds fine, this was great, good, sounds good, blah, 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 all that great stuff. Would genuinely appreciate it if someone could just do it real quick. Thank you so much. I see really great feedback in the chat. So I just want to also thank you, Irish Gordy Knott. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate you, Ryan Loftus. Thank you, sir. So I just really want to kind of put a bow on that conversation. First and foremost, folks, I appreciate everyone for the positive remarks in the chat. Taliuta obviously is a great young lady. She's a great lady. She really is, man. This was one of those conversations where I started the conversation off by saying, you know, I just want to keep you about 10 or 15 minutes. You know, we'll talk about the process, everything that was going on, Kingston, final steps, all that great stuff, right? But for me, this was one of those interviews that truly I kind of just looked up and realized that it went almost a half an hour. I mean, it went over a half an hour. So first and foremost, I don't think anyone should be surprised. And I talked about this a lot throughout the process. No one should be surprised that Kingston is the way that he is after hearing that conversation. And I think for me, because one thing I told you guys was I would never say flat out that I think it's going to be Notre Dame. I was always just on the record of, I think Notre Dame has a chance in the end, because Kingston has been one of those kids that has just been super, super consistent the entire time through, as far as this is what I'm looking for. This is my process. This is what I want to make happen. And that plan had never changed throughout the entire process. So I believed him. I did. And I know there was a lot of back and forth. And Taliuta, his mother, even said during the podcast that going into that final decision window, the last couple weeks there, it was either going to be USC or Ohio State. And then that week of clarity, when he went up to the mountain, he was with God and he had his process. He came out with Notre Dame as the pick. So just a fascinating recruitment, first and foremost. But secondly, and more importantly, I want to thank Taliuta for giving us a little bit of insight into that conversation. It was so fascinating, because even the stuff of him training with his father growing up, her role in everything, how they chose the high school that he went to. I mean, I don't know if you guys heard that part about choosing St. John Bosco over Centennial and Mater Dei and kind of the decision-making process that went into it. Just a really fascinating backstory, a really, really great family. So I was excited that she was able to join me, and I was thankful that she gave me the truth. And that's the only thing I've ever gotten from the Viliamo Asa family is the truth. And I'm excited for him to be a part of the Notre Dame family for obvious reasons. He's a really good football player. But for more than that, I think that one thing we have learned, and this is going back to Debbie Otting, and this is going back to Shonda Gray, and this is going back to Glenn James and Don Schuler. These families that end up picking Notre Dame typically are great people. They really are. And the Viliamo Asa family is included in that, obviously. So I'm happy that he's a part of the program, and I'm happy that they made the decision they did, because that's a great support system and great family. So we're going to get into the mailbag next. Just wanted to put the wraps on that interview, which I thought was really fun, really good. So before we get over to the mailbag, though, you can keep putting mailbag questions in the chat, by the way, and we'll be able to work through that MB or mailbag in front of your question to distinguish. Make sure, if you like this interview, hit that like button. Would very much appreciate that. Subscribe to the podcast, the notification bell at the bottom. Make sure, please, that you hit that for us, because I'm telling you what, folks, you're going to have a lot of content this week. I don't want to toot our own horn too much, but we had really good weekend this past weekend from a company perspective. A lot of views, a lot of great impact and great feedback that we've received recently. This morning, Brian has churning out a bunch of content. I've put out a couple like in-depth pieces from the action this past weekend, including the commit performance recap. I also put out a little bit of a interview I did with Bryce Phillips, who is a cornerback out of Tennessee State that Notre Dame is going to be seeing this weekend. And I even got a little bit of intel for you all as far as what you should expect from this Tennessee State team coming to town this weekend to South Bend. So make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, all that great stuff. We're going to get the mailbag next. We want to thank you all so much for being with us on this portion of the Irish Breakdown podcast. All right, folks, let's get into some mailbag questions. I want to thank everybody in advance for all of the questions that we have in the chat. Again, MB or mailbag in front, and we'll be able to roll through some of these questions. Appreciate you all so much for the ones that we have in. Want to start us off with Coleman Smith. Coleman asks, if the wide receivers build on this, could it make us get back in with Ryan Wingo? Of course, Ryan Wingo is wide receiver out of St. Louis University in the state of Missouri. He is considered a 5-star by at least 2 platforms in the 2024 recruiting class. It's a great question. Coleman, this is what I will say with this, right? Is that from a wide receiver perspective, Notre Dame has already hit their numbers. You have Cam Williams. You have... Sorry, I'm just reading some of these comments. Y'all are funny. Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, and Logan Saldate are in the class. 3 is only the number that you needed. So you're good to go there. What I will say, though, is that I think Notre Dame will keep attention open to some impact wide receivers in the 2024 class if there is an impact made, right? So I think that Ryan Wingo's a guy that I wouldn't be shocked if Notre Dame keeps tabs on. I wouldn't be shocked if they keep tabs on a couple other wide receivers. Not because they need necessarily, but because they are in a position where if you knock it out of the park, then more guys are going to want to come. And I'm of the belief that you never turn away great football players. And I think that's the belief that Notre Dame is in right now, is that you didn't need 4 wide receivers in the class. But in the world of college football where it is, numbers can change so quickly, guys. It's like Jane Thomas, if he has a great season, like say he repeats his first game and he continues to build off of it and he has a great year. What if he decides to go pro, for instance? What if there's a player or two decide to transfer this offseason? What if there's an injury that happens? Numbers can fluctuate so much. It can also fluctuate in the other direction as well. Because if Notre Dame like, let's say, for instance, they're expecting, and I'm not even talking about wide receiver, but let's just say that they're expecting a guy to maybe leave after. When did someone say Ryan Wingo doesn't have grades? Ryan, I don't know where that one came from, but Ryan Wingo has grades. He is more than qualified enough to get into the University of Notre Dame. He's a high academic kid. My point is that, sorry, let's get sidetracked sometimes, guys. Stick with me. Remember ADHD over here. So I believe that numbers can fluctuate in both directions. Let's say that there's a couple of guys in Notre Dame's roster that Notre Dame expects to be out after this year, and they decide to come back for a fifth year, or they come back due to an injury, or whatever the decision might be made. Numbers can fluctuate so much, so quickly, that I think that you continue to recruit those types of players just in case, the elite players. And Ryan Loftus, it's not going to work out most likely with Ryan Wingo because he's just not that interested in Notre Dame. That's kind of where that conversation is. So it's not going to work out with Notre Dame. It's the reason that Ryan Wingo wouldn't go to Notre Dame is because it would have nothing to do with grades. Ryan Wingo is very smart, very good student. He can get into the University of Notre Dame. That is no issue at all. There's a couple other players we've talked about that it would be an issue, but Ryan Wingo was never one of those players that was an issue. So I think Notre Dame will keep recruiting guys like Ryan Wingo. I think they'll keep recruiting really good players in general. And if you were able to take the next step, I think that Notre Dame could potentially lure some of those guys in. And if a Ryan Wingo, and I'm just using Ryan Wingo as an example because that's the player that was asked here, right, with Coleman. But if a Ryan Wingo decided, oh, I love this, this group, right? Like I love this school, and now they showed me that they can produce wide receivers and be productive, and I want to come to Notre Dame. I think that Notre Dame would make that obviously an option for him, right? So always recruit great football players because numbers can change very quickly. So great question, though, Coleman, to get us started here. We had David Lowe, I didn't see in the chat anymore, said any outside shot that Irish try and work on Ryan Wingo if he wants in. Just kind of the same thing real quick. I just kind of hit on this, so I don't want to revisit all the same spots. But David, I think that Notre Dame will continue to recruit some guys because there's always an option and numbers can change very quickly. Thank you, though, for the question. I appreciate you. We had a question from Rob Osgood who says, in your opinion, I know it's only one game, but what do you think recruits in the 2025 class took away from the Navy game? It's a great question, Rob, because like you said, it's only one game and it is against Navy, right? It wasn't like it was a great team and you were, it's not like you beat Ohio State game one and everything was kicking on high cylinders and all that type of stuff, right? I think that we need to understand every side to the conversation, right? One, Notre Dame did what they should have done against Navy because they were a better football team, more talented. But the one thing that I loved that I saw from Notre Dame is that they were incredibly organized. They just always seemed like they were a step ahead in that football game, and it looked like everything was just incredibly crisp and they were prepared. That's a great outlook for the coaches, right? And if I'm a player, I look at that and say, the coaches looked prepared. They looked crisp. They had guys in the right position to make plays. But more than anything, I think the biggest outcome from this past game is it gave you a different perspective on Notre Dame as far as how they can win games. Because we know last year, for instance, some of the most impressive games Notre Dame had, I always point to Clemson. I always point to Syracuse, like a couple of the more important games that they had. They won off of talent, but they won kind of gritty, right? Like a lot of running the football, not explosive passing game, just some limitations offensively. So I think the biggest impact is that Notre Dame showed that they can win in different ways in week one, which if I'm a wide receiver, if I'm Taylor, if I am Derek Meadows, who's high on Notre Dame, if I am Cooper Perry and I'm Dalen McCutcheon and some of the other great wide receivers that Notre Dame is recruiting, I think you kind of like raise an eyebrow like, they were right. Like they're going to implement their offense and they're going to get wide receivers more involved. They're going to create explosive plays and they're going to be more balanced and efficient on both sides of the coin. So I really think that for me, it's just the showing a different layer to what you can be offensively, man. Like that was my biggest that was my biggest takeaway from this game, this first game, is that yes, it needs to translate now to NC State and Ohio State and Clemson and USC and some of the Duke and the bigger games of the schedule. But I really think, Rob, it's a great question because I think that it just gave you a glimpse into what the possible is at Notre Dame. And the great thing is that it was week 0. So all these recruits were watching Notre Dame this weekend. They were, because outside of USC playing against San Jose State, where San Jose State actually put up a decent fight, at least offensively, against USC for a while, wasn't a lot of great football games to watch. I mean, I watched them because I'm a weirdo and I just love watching games. So I was watching like Jackson State at some points and stuff, right? But I think that for me, it's really that Notre Dame showed that maybe they're a little different than what the stigma is, the stereotype is. And I think that's a massive step for Notre Dame. I really do. We had another question from Coleman Smith. He said, when is Lambert going to make his commitment? The wait is annoying since it's kind of somewhat obvious Notre Dame is the pick. Coleman, I mean, this is what we've been talking about. Obviously, Lambert is the 2024 offensive tackle out of Catholic Memorial up in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. Everyone keeps asking the same question, and I totally understand it. I get it, folks. Let me say it again. I understand. Notre Dame is in a really good spot with Lambert. People are anxiously awaiting him to make a decision. We think that Notre Dame is in the driver's seat for this one. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. And maybe Gerby knows the answer right now, but like sometimes I question if Lambert, as of right now, knows exactly when he's going to make the decision. All I know is that fortunately for you all, let's do half here. Fortunately for you guys, the plan, as far as we know, is for him to still make a decision before his senior season kicks off. Unfortunate side of everything is that from the waiting game perspective, is that Massachusetts games start a little bit later. So he's still not playing for a couple more weeks. So it can drag on a little bit as far as the rest of the offseason, but I would be surprised if I'd be surprised if this one went into the season. I'd be actually shocked if this one went into the season. Notre Dame's in a really good spot. I understand it's tough to be patient sometimes, but just be patient. Let the kid have his moment, and we'll see how it works out. Notre Dame is in a good spot, though. Just want to reiterate that one more time. Notre Dame is in a very good spot with Lambert heading into whenever that decision comes. Michael with a question. Any update on upcoming game day visits for 2024-2025 recruits? Also, anything new intel regarding Deuce Knight? Thank you. Michael, so we have on the, I don't know if you're a member of the Irish Breakdown message board. I would say that if you're not, you should subscribe at boards.irishbreakdown.com because we have a visitor list already up there. So we already have several kids that are verified for the Ohio State game, for instance. There's someone verified for a Central Michigan game. That is Bear Bachmeier, the 2025 quarterback out of the state of California. This next weekend, I forgot to do this in the first section. I should have, but we had a lot of content today. So we'll be all right, man. We'll be all right. So, and let me just start this question real quick. Logan Saldate is going to be coming for the Tennessee State game. Of course, he's committed to Notre Dame in the 2024 class. This will actually be his first visit to Notre Dame, which is kind of interesting. So he'll be on campus this weekend. Bear Bachmeier will be on the next game against Central Michigan at home. And then there's a litter of talented players that are going to the Ohio State game. So boards at irishbreakdown.com. Anything new regarding Deuce Knight? Notre Dame has still positioned themselves in a very good spot. They are continuing that relationship. Deuce Knight is very high on Notre Dame. We expect a decision to be made this fall. And as of right now, we expect his visit to be for the USC game. That's just kind of where that one is trending as of right now. So nothing crazy new, just Notre Dame is maintaining momentum, which you need to in this recruitment. So we still feel good about where Notre Dame is with Deuce Knight as of right now. Great question, though, Michael. Thank you so much. Next question. I had a super chat from Raymond Harton. My bad, Raymond. I completely missed the super chat, sir. Let me pull this up real quick. Great first game. Love the coaching up of the guys on our team this year. Go Irish. Absolutely, Raymond. Thank you so much for the super chat, sir. But yes, I think that was the biggest takeaway I had from Notre Dame the first game. It wasn't that Notre Dame is really talented and they took care of business. Like, that stuff was obvious for me. It was that coaching-wise, everything looked crisp, man. Like, even mistakes they made, it wasn't because they were out of position or it was a bad call necessarily. The coaches just looked like they had complete control over that game, which I think was a really good sign for Notre Dame. Really, really good sign. And Raymond, thank you again for the super chat, man. I appreciate it. We had Irish Blood who said, can we all agree that Notre Dame should keep the end zone design from Ireland and bring it to South Bend? I would actually just love people's takeaways from that. I didn't hate it, but I mean, I'm a traditionalist a little bit. I mean, I don't know. People just put your opinion in the chat, man. I don't really have like a strong opinion overall about the end zone design. I think that it was sharp. I think it looked nice, but I don't know about an every game perspective. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I'm very indecisive with that stuff sometimes because I am admittedly a traditionalist. I like things staying the same. So I don't know. It was nice though. It was definitely nice. So I don't know if people agree with that or not. If we can all agree. I wanted to see some people kind of putting stuff. Yeah. yeah. So I was just reading a couple of these comments. I'll try to get a picture of it too. I know someone just asked if there was a picture of the end zone. I think I could probably pull one up, but let me see if I can or cannot. But let's move on to the next question here. From Irish Gordy Now says, assuming Notre Dame lands all currently committed wide receivers, how would you rank the wide receiver class for Notre Dame in 2024 room from an athletic upside perspective? Irish Gordy Now, I'm assuming this is compared to 2023. Is that what this is asking me? I assume. I mean, for me personally, I would say Cam Williams and Braylon James, I think, have similar upsides as a football player. I just think that Cam Williams probably brings a little bit more of a, well, not a little bit more. He brings a much higher floor than what Braylon James is. But I think I think their upsides are pretty similar, though. I really do. I think what the next thing is when you compare Rico Flores to Caleb Smith and Rico Flores, Caleb Smith, and Jaden Greathouse comparative to Logan Saldate and Micah Gilbert. First and foremost, it's a hard comparison because we're comparing 3 guys to 2 guys. I mean, that's a little bit tough, right? I think that Micah Gilbert's, I'll put it like this. I think that the ceiling might be a little bit higher in 2024, but I think the floor in 2023 is just a little bit higher. Like, I know Jane Greyhouse is going to be a good player. I know Rico Flores is going to be a good player. I believe that Saldate and Mike Gilbert are going to be really good players, but like Jaden Greathouse is one of the highest floors that I saw in either the 2024 or 2025 class. Ultimately, though, I think 2024 class is fantastic. I really do. And I think it fits really well together. It's very diverse alignment-wise. I mean, like, I'll put it like this. I think all 3 receivers in 2024 could play multiple spots in the Notre Dame system. Like, there's not a slot-only player. I don't think there's just a boundary-only player. Like Cam Williams, I think, could play Z to the field. I think he could play in the boundary at times. I think that Logan Saldate could play both field positions. And I also think that Micah Gilbert could play boundary. He could play slot. So I think all those players are really, really talented and diverse with how you can align them up. So I'm big on the 2024 class, man. I think that class is going to end up surprising a lot of people, not Notre Dame fans either, like a lot of people outside. Because as of right now, most people have Logan Saldate rated as a 3-star. That's going to be people's outside perception. Oh, well, this small school kid from California who's coming to Oregon State. Like, how good can he be? Micah Gilbert, lack of production because of injury last season. Like, how good can he be? He's only a top 250 kid. And I think that we're just underrating a couple of those guys right now. We had OC Irish fan who said, man, and mailbag, It's simple math. As Notre Dame succeeds, IB Nation grows and succeeds. Yes, sir. I mean, it really is. It's funny though in the media side of things because there's times when chaos ensues that media outlets actually do flourish a little bit, right? It's like when the Brian Kelly stuff was happening, like numbers are great, right? Because it's like everyone wants to read about it because it's like recent news. So any type of news does drive the clicks, but ultimately the positive news will always drive more than the negative when it's all said and done, in my opinion. And I think that we saw that on Saturday. I mean, if you guys didn't hear my beginning intro, I just was kind of thanking all the listeners and everyone because you all have obviously been tapped into Notre Dame football first and foremost. And you have helped our message board grow extensively. You just gave us on Saturday, we had our biggest viewership from a site perspective ever. So we owe a lot of that to you. But I think that you are hitting on something there, OC Irish fan, is that when great things happen, IB Nation will continue to grow with as the Notre Dame program continues to grow. So yes, we are definitely given a lot of opportunities based upon how the team is doing, which is a very interesting dynamic. But thank you so much for the question though, or the statement, I should say. We had Matt McCarthy, who I think back-to-back questions we'll get to here. Said, Ryan, do you think Notre Dame would take a fourth receiver in the 2024 class if the right one came along? What players would you personally be pushing for? I do think that they would at least be open to the conversation, Matt. Yeah, I talked about this with a little bit with the Ryan Wingo question that came up earlier. But if a Ryan Wingo wanted to come to campus, so I think Notre Dame would take him. Yeah, I think they would push it to 4 in that instance, right? I don't have names as much as because like Ryan Wingo is one of the only guys that people bring up because Notre Dame had been recruiting him, right? And he's still uncommitted, obviously, in the 2024 class. I think that we're going to see more names start to pop up because as of right now, outside of Gerby Lambert and Davis Andrews in the 2024 class, there's no other real targets on the board that are like clear-cut targets for Notre Dame as far as their takes right now for Notre Dame if they wanted to choose Notre Dame. But we're in the evaluation period now. So as more games are played, could there be another corner that pops on the scene and Notre Dame gets interested in? Sure. Could there be another defensive tackle? Sure. Could there be another wide receiver? Sure. Could there even be a tight end? Maybe. I mean, so I think Notre Dame's going to keep their eyes open during the evaluation period. So yeah, I think a fourth receiver could be on the table depending on who wanted to come and play. That's obviously a big question mark, but so I don't have any names for you all right now because I think that Notre Dame is going to do their due diligence and do the evaluation process here moving forward. And Matt had another question. He just said, do you think Kingston Villiamasa will have a real chance to start next season? After watching his film, I think he's a great player who at very least will play a lot. He'd be hard to keep off the field. One, I think, Matt, for me, it's a question of who returns in 2024 at linebacker because technically JD Bertrand, Maris Loifel, and Jack Kaiser could all come back if they wanted to. I don't expect all those guys to come back, so that'll obviously alleviate a little bit of the depth concerns if you're a freshman coming in. But you still have Drake Bowen, Nolan Ziegler will obviously be back at that point more than likely. You'll have some other young guys like Jaden Osbury's of the world, Jalen Sneed at Rover, even though that it isn't as practical for the conversation of Kingston. But I really think it depends on what of the senior linebackers that come back. If let's say a JD Bertrand does not come back, for instance, in this hypothetical, then I think that Kingston will definitely play as a freshman because I think that you slot him right behind Drake Bowen potentially or someone like that. And I think he has potential to play really good football. He reminds me a lot of, and I've made this comparison before, completely different positions, but I think that Kingston Villiamasa is a lot like Jaden Greathouse in the sense that is he going to be a starter year one? Maybe not, but I would be hard pressed if he wasn't in the too deep because he knows how to play. He's incredibly physical. His body's mature, and he's played high level football, so he knows he knows the demands of playing for a big program. So I could see a guy like Kingston Villiamasa coming in and being like a Jaden Greathouse, where it's just like he's in the too deep because he's a good football player, man. So I think that he would be hard to keep off the field as a freshman. I do. We had a question from Silly Goose who says, mailbag, can you see any scenario where a Bronte Johnson or Jeremiah Love transition to wide receiver at some point? Would that be a bad sign for recruiting or a testament to recruiting? Would be a bad sign of recruit. I mean, I think it'd be a bad sign for the wide receiver position because I don't think the wide receivers are going to need a Jeremiah Love or Bronte Johnson at wide receiver. Could Bronte Johnson play wide receiver at Notre Dame? Yes. Could Jeremiah Love do it? Lesser degree, but yes, he could. But one, I don't know why they would need to because Notre Dame is recruiting wide receiver at a very high level. So I don't see why the need would arise. And ultimately, Notre Dame needs Bronte Johnson at safety. That's one of the spots that I just don't have a great feel for the next couple of years, man. Like I'm a little worried about the safety position. So they need Bronte Johnson to play. Notre Dame, I mean, you saw Jeremiah Love in game one. Yeah, I mean, he looked fantastic. So why would I move either one of those kids to wide receiver? And with how Notre Dame is recruiting and developing the wide receiver position, I don't see the need there, right? Like this isn't a couple years ago where you had 4 scholarship receivers healthy on the roster at one point. Notre Dame has created depth and they have a lot of good football players that are entering the wide receiver room. So I don't see the need for that one. So that would actually be a very bad sign because I would think there must be a lot of injuries at receiver if that is the move that you have to make. So no, I like both those players at the positions that they play, and I don't see any reason to make that decision. We had another question from Irish Gordian Knot who said, what would Sean Sevillano have to do for you to rank him over Owen Wafel? Man, that's actually a really tough question. Let me think. What would you have to do to I mean, I think the biggest difference for why I value Owen Wafel over Sean Sevillano right now is that Owen Wafel I just think is a better athlete. I mean, that's kind of where it is, Irish Gordian Knot. So, I mean, and Owen also is a very productive football player. I mean, he had over 20 tackles for loss and 10 sacks as a junior as well. So he was productive, and I think he's a good athlete. Like, I think he's a really good athlete. He's a strong kid. So I think Sean, like, I just want to see more athleticism and more explosiveness out of him. And that's why I'm going to be very interested to see what I think about him after seeing another full season under his belt, because he's always going to be productive. I mean, the kid had 50 tackles for loss and 22 sacks as a junior, but he was playing against not great competition. The schedule this year for his school, for Clearwater Academy International, is a lot better. So I'm interested to see, one, if the production stays similar, and two, I just want to see if athleticism comes along a little bit. Because I have no questions about him as a point of attack player. Like, he's a strong kid, boxy frame, pretty physical. I'm questioning like how much the athleticism will translate to the next level. Like, that's kind of what I'm interested in. So we'll see as he develops. Next question is from, and we're already nearing the end, folks. So if you want to get a couple more questions in the chat, make sure to do that now. Or else we're going to end the show. I mean, not super early. We're already over 2 hours, but end the show maybe a little bit earlier. PK said, to the best of your knowledge, who in the 2024 class is coming in early in January? Great question. So as of right now, I believe for certain, the guys that I know of are certain early enrollees. CJ Carr is one. I believe Jack Larson is another. I believe Cam Williams is another. Not sure about Logan Saldate. Don't quote me on that one. I believe both the Charlotte Christian kids are. So I believe that both of Micah Gilbert and Bryce Young will be early enrollees. The running back side will get back to you. Offensive lineman, I don't think Peter Jones is. Anthony Knapp is. I'm not sure about Styles Prescott. So on offense, for the guys that I know for sure, Micah Gilbert, CJ Carr, Anthony Knapp, Jack Larson, for sure. Defensively, Bryce Young, Cole Mullins will be early enrollees. Let me think. Logan Thomas, I believe, is an early. Wait, nope. Logan Thomas is not an early enrollee. I lied. I don't know that one for certain yet. Linebackers, Kingston will be an early enrollee. No doubt about that one. I believe the other 2 linebackers are wait and sees. Carson Hobbs can't early enrollee because there's some weird Ohio rule. Leonard Moore, I believe, is an early enrollee. Kennedy Urlacher, I believe, is an early enrollee. Not sure about Tabron. And not sure about Bronte. So I think you have 5 on defense right now, 4 on offense, if I am correct in that. But PK, we will have more in-depth on that, obviously, as people move through the season. And we get a little bit more insight on who for sure is going to be an early enrollee. But those are the guys I know of as of right now. Great question, though. We had another question from WJS, who says, IB mailbag, can you make a show with you and Greer? Call it Linebacker Lounge, just an idea. I mean, I would love it. I mean, the problem is that Greer is a college coach at the University of Charlotte, right? So for the 49ers. So I don't think he has a lot of time, unfortunately. I would love it. I mean, if we had a show just talking about just the terminology of playing linebacker and the different tendencies and defensive schemes, I would love that, man. I would thoroughly enjoy that. Unfortunately, I think Greer Martini might be a little bit busy, but I'll have a lot more recruiting stuff for you guys. I'm starting a little bit of an extra recruiting segment that'll be coming out weekly. So I'll try to get you a little bit more content from the podcast perspective. But unfortunately, I think Greer might be a little bit busy, unfortunately. But yeah, I would personally love it though, man. I love talking the linebacker position. I love talking ball in general, but the linebacker position is one that is near and dear to my heart. So yeah, I would love that though. Would definitely love that. Jay Henry, what's up, Jay? How does Chancey Stuckey and D'La McCullough handle their rooms with so much talent, young talent in their rooms? Do they start to have combos with the other kids? Jay, I mean, I guess this is talking about like playing time, I guess is the conversation. I think that, and I think Dylan and Chancey both answered the bell in week 1 because, I mean, played a lot of dudes. I mean, we talked about it. This isn't just specific to wide receivers, but 9 players caught a pass against Navy, and all 5 running backs had carries and touches in that football game. So Jeremiah Love came in, 4 carries, 40 yards. Jadarian Price had a touchdown. Jabron Payne played. I mean, Audrey Gestame obviously played. I mean, for me, like Coach Dealin's McCullough answered very easily. Like, if you're a good running back and you're a weapon, come here and we're going to use you because we're going to keep guys fresh. Wide receivers wise, we saw Jaden Greathouse in big moments of that football game against Navy. We saw Rico Flores in big moments of that football game. We saw Deion Colsey. We saw Tobias Merriweather. We saw Jane Thomas. Saw Matt Salerno. Like, Notre Dame showed guys that if they can play, they're going to get on the field. So I think you just do what you're doing, man. Like, I don't think you need to have a conversation about it. I mean, I think the big thing though is that both coaches, I think, have already showed that like the best player is going to play at the end of the day, right? So if a player's upset about playing time, which is always going to happen, it's a very simple conversation, right? I'm showing that I'll play you if you're the best player. Like, you're mixing in here. You got to outwork the next guy in front of you then if you want to get to that next tier of touches, right? So I think that they'll handle it pretty well, man. Honestly, though, if for some reason it gets to a point where like player X wants to transfer because player Y is playing more, the great thing is that both those positions are recruiting at a very high level. So I know it's sad every time a player transfers from a program, but as long as Notre Dame is bringing in talents, it's a necessary evil in college football nowadays. So it's a great question, Jay, but I'm just not worried about it personally because I just think that Notre Dame's bringing in so much talent, but they're showing that they will play the talents if they deserve it, which I think is a great thing. Next question is from Joe Hunter. Said, Ryan, any recruits, or he said recruits coming this weekend? So we had an update a while ago, and I think he posted on Twitter again this morning. Logan Saldate, wide receiver commit in the 2024 class, will be on campus this weekend for Notre Dame's game against Tennessee State on Saturday. The answer is, to your question, though, D-Troll, yes, there will be recruits on campus. There's no doubt. Will there be like a substantial list of big-time recruits? No. Like, they're going to save those for the Ohio States of the world, the USCs of the world. But there will be recruits on campus. We'll keep you guys updated at boards.irishbreakdown.com for when we get more verification on some guys that will be on campus this weekend. But I wouldn't expect a lot of substantial players outside of Logan Saldate coming to campus. Raymond Harton said, is there someone from Good Counsel we are looking at, or was that last year? Raymond, there were a couple guys from Good Counsel last year that Notre Dame was recruiting for a little bit in the 2024 class, or this class, I should say. Like Kyle Altuner was a good offensive lineman that Notre Dame was looking at for a little bit before some other guys just became more priorities than him. But there's nobody in the 2025 class that Notre Dame is looking at from Good Counsel. St. Francis Academy is the big place down in Maryland that Notre Dame is looking at a lot. I mean, you got Blake Woodby and Kevin Humes and Trent Wilson, and there's a lot of talent out of the Maryland area in general, but Good Counsel in 2025 does not have anybody that Notre Dame is targeting as of right now. Great question, though. We had our next question was from Michael, Dallas fan, NBC Campbell, Michael Campbell. Who are Notre Dame's top 10 fastest players in the 2023 roster who are getting playing time? Who are getting playing time? So, I mean, I can't include Micah Bell in that conversation, right? Man, Michael, that's a great question. Chris Tyree, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, excuse me, that are getting playing time. I would say, Cam Hart. I was trying to work through offensive defense, but I want to make sure I don't miss people. Cam Hart. I would say Benjamin Morrison is probably in the top 10. I would assume. Tobias Merriweather. Deion Colsey. Jaden Mickey. Man, it's a tough question, sir. Two more guys. I mean, skill position, I guess. Rico Flores and somebody else. I mean, Jabron Payne actually is pretty fast. People don't really give him enough credit, but it's probably the fastest right now. I mean, the crazy part is that a couple of years from down the line, we're going to be talking about Micah Bell and Cam Williams and Christian Gray would be in that top 10. Excuse me. I forgot Christian Gray played this past week. Christian Gray would 100% be in that top 10. My guy can scoot. So that would be some of them. We had, and Michael, thank you so much for joining the show, man. I see you're not terrorizing Ohio State fans on Twitter right now, man. Nice to have you. I'm being sarcastic, by the way. I'm just messing with you. Please don't take that to heart. We had Lucky Ducks 512 said, what is one thing you'd like to see CJ Carr improve at this year? I mean, one's a physical thing, and then one's just kind of an operational thing. One, physically, I think that he continues to need to add just weight to his frame, power to his frame, because I still think there's an uptick in arm strength that he could have. I think his arm's good. Like, it's good arm strength, but I still think that he could add more pop to his arm. I really do. So arm strength, I think, could just still take a step forward if you're CJ. Mechanically, he's really sound. I think the one thing is that I've talked about his ability to work outside of structure a whole lot more. He's done a great job being able to manage those things, manage the chaos, and be able to make plays outside of structure. I just think, though, that there are times where maybe live to play another down could be a thing that CJ should work for. So I think the risk management thing is the biggest thing, is that it doesn't happen often to CJ because he's a really good sound decision maker. But there are times where it's like, pull it back a little bit. Like, we understand you can make some plays when it's outside of structure, but like live to play another down. So I think just risk management to a degree, and then adding power to his frame, continuing to up that arm strength. Those are the couple big things that I would like to see. Oh, sorry, Jason, you're right. I meant to say with all due respect, Michael, my apologies. Last question, unless we have somebody else who wants to drop one in. Detroit Hunter, are you traveling for any games this year? Perhaps a USC game to do an on-campus live show. On-campus live. Oh, I get what you're saying there. So games I'll be at this year. I don't know if it's going to be limited to this or not, but we'll see. As of right now, I'll be at the Central Michigan game, and I'll be down in in North Carolina, most likely for the Duke game. So there's only two games I have on the docket as of right now. I would like to get to at least one more home game, but it's not for sure going to happen yet. So those are the two games. USC, I mean, hey, man, if someone was to commit during the USC game and they want Notre Dame, if they want IB Nation to cover it, give me a call in my DMs. I can make that happen, man. I can make that happen. No doubt about it. I think that's going to do it. Yep, that's it. So real quick, before we get out of here, folks, as we wind down the Irish Breakdown podcast, if you could please, if you liked some of the recruiting conversation we had earlier, if you liked my interview with Taliota Viliamo Asa, or if you like the mailbag section today, if you could please do me a favor, don't leave yet. Just hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Make sure you go sign up at boris@irishbreakdown.com. We will be back tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 o'clock Eastern Time. I'll be back with Brian Driscoll tomorrow as we start to really turn forward now to Tennessee State and what you should be expecting from them this weekend. So make sure you follow boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll be having a lot more info, a lot more content. Want to thank you all so much and being with me here today. Ryan Roberts, Director of Recruiting, bringing you all a little bit of recruiting hour on a Monday, a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.